What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Extra Serving, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief of NRN, joined once again by my renowned and wonderful colleague. the looks you gave me as I said those two words. Alicia Kelso. Alicia, welcome back to Extra Serving.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Alicia, it's been a week. It's been a week. I mean, goodness gracious. It's not fair that third quarter earnings happens the same week as a presidential election.
Well, and
one of those sides would figure out how to move it, right?
Right, no doubt. And don't forget, I turned 50 on election day. So it's been a week.
This has been a massive week for you. Okay, we got to talk about the election. We're going to start by talking about the election. I'm going to say at the outset here, we are not a politics podcast. Alicia and I, you should never listen to us with politics because those are your own opinions. We have our own opinions. We won't get into that. But of course, there are implications for the restaurant industry, for the re-election of President Trump that we have to talk about. So let's do that. I think right off the bat, of course, a pro-business president and businesses were eager to have him back. We were talking before we started. He is somebody who did what he said, and in his first term, he created a very, very pro-business environment, including rolling back taxes, which he has said again that he's going to roll back corporate taxes. I think that probably right off the bat for restaurant industry is probably the most attractive proposition for a second Trump administration. Alicia, what do you think restaurant executives are thinking about that?
It's definitely a benefit for corporate. Let's make that clear. I don't know how those implications are going to fly for the independent sector of the industry. I think that's going to be sort of mixed for the smaller operators. But if you're a big restaurant corporation, you probably like the proposal of reduction of that corporate tax rate from, I think it was 21% to about 15%. And, kind of along those lines, another attractive selling point was, Trump is very, he wants to eradicate a lot of the regulations that a lot of operators struggle with. And, we've seen this especially affecting the smaller guys as well. And in fact, I wrote a story last week based on data from the New York City Hospitality Alliance. It said regulations are the number 2 thing that is concerning operators in that city, the biggest city for restaurants, the most. We've just, they believe we've become over-regulated in this industry. And I've heard that anecdotally through multiple events and so on and so forth. So I think those are probably the 2 most attractive things about this incoming presidency come January.
Yep, agreed. And then if you look at the workforce component here, I think one of the things that the workforce would be happy to hear is that he has been supportive of the No Tax on Tips Act, which was first proposed by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. So this ended up being a bipartisan support, by the way. Democratic Kamala Harris was also supporting No Tax on Tips Act. Which is exactly what it sounds like, to not tax the tips that restaurant service members are making. Now, there's some disagreement over whether or not that would be all that significant for a lot of the restaurant workforce, because a lot of them live below that line anyway, live below that taxable income limit. But if this were to happen, what do you think that do we think this is going to be a good thing for the restaurant industry?
I think it's all over the map. I've tried to understand this since it was first proposed. And there are a lot of people worried that this would lead to a significant amount of fraud. I don't disagree with that. I think there are many people who are greedy enough to take advantage of that. I think the bottom line is I don't think tip workers want it. And I think we have to listen to the people that these policies affect the most. From what I understand, wasn't there disparities among states for the tip wage?
That sounds right. In terms of, is it a state issue versus making
Massachusetts?
It a national?
Massachusetts voted against the minimum wage for tip workers.
Yes, that was part of Tuesday. Yep.
Right. So if you go state by state, there are some disparities among, I guess the polling numbers or whatever that came back in favor of, depending on state. And I think I just think that's really interesting. And I think that underscores how complicated, this whole entire policy is. It's not a blanket policy. And I think it's going to be a continued nuanced conversation for the foreseeable future because it's fairly new. It's a fairly new narrative in terms of introduction, legislatively speaking. And so, where it goes from here, your guess is mine. I really just don't know how this will go, but I think it will be market by market.
Arizona, the other state that voted against allowing employers to pay tip workers up to 25% less than the minimum wage. I think we have to talk about, though, the last thing, that there could be genuine influence from a second Trump administration on the restaurant industry is his promise to deport illegal immigrants. This is big for the restaurant industry. And I think this is somewhere where we have got to have a conversation as a restaurant industry. Whatever you believe about immigration, whatever you believe about the border, whatever you believe about how many illegal immigrants are in this country, the restaurant industry is powered by immigrants.
22%.
22%. There's just no denying that. And a lot of them very likely are illegal. And so if Trump makes good on his promise to deport illegal immigrants, we have no indication to not believe that that's going to happen. This could have a huge impact on the restaurant industry. This is something where, again, the restaurant industry must be vocal about finding a reasonable path forward, I believe, for illegal immigrants. Alicia, I'm sure you feel the same, but what do you think about where that goes from here?
I mean, not just the industry. I think the entire, country. We've got to finally figure out a bipartisan solution on this. Mass deportation is, I think it's his policy on paper. Like you said, there's no reason to believe he's not going to enact it. Is it simple to execute? No. Is it cost efficient to execute? No. What is the implication if this does get executed? Like you mentioned, 22% of the restaurant industry workforce is immigrants. That doesn't even count the implications for agriculture, which obviously rolls up to our industry. Right. There's a cause and effect here that I think will have, again, deeper implications on the cost of goods, on menu prices, and at the grocery store. And I think this has to be an urgent, near-term conversation, like you said, and it's got to. And the national, all the trade organizations have to be very vocal about it because the industry could feasibly collapse if something like this were to happen.
Totally. Yeah. Yep. National Restaurant Association, state associations. If you're part of one, contact them, start to make a plan. First off, I would also encourage you to support your employees. I think that's important to say. Whatever the makeup of your employees is, support them and hear them out and be there for them. And then work with the associations because at the end of the day, you just want to see what's best for, of course, the industry and the people that make up this industry, the wonderfully vibrant and diverse restaurant industry. And that's going to be a big job here in the next several months and years. So moving right along, shall we talk about third quarter earnings, which again, really just brutal week for this. Alicia, you and the rest of our team has been just crushing it. So thank you for how much you've been on top of it. Let's talk about the big ones. I think we have to talk about Yum Brands, Dine Brands, Papa John's, RBI have all reported. Let's start with Yum because, of course, biggest restaurant company in the world. Mixed bag, Taco Bell, yay, KFC, nay. Where do you fall on how does this feel for this company?
Yeah, I'm wearing a Taco Bell sweatshirt today because they were a clear winner of the third quarter. As you mentioned, their sister chains domestically, especially did not fare so well. So KFC's same-store sales were down by 5%. That's their third straight quarter. And they're not down nominally. They've been down -5, -7, -5 again, sequentially. And that's despite throwing $5 value boxes out there, saucy nugget variations out there. They're trying to find some traction amid this this increasingly valued environment. And obviously they're struggling very deeply on how to do that. Pizza Hut also had negative 1% domestically. They could be worse, I guess, looking at KFC. Then there's Taco Bell, like you mentioned, up 4%. Just a juggernaut right now in this environment. And fast food at large did not have a sexy quarter. Taco Bell was probably one of the very few exceptions, if not the only exception. I've got it all written down here and they're all highlighted. So be patient with me. But Taco Bell just continues to defy the odds. And I think there's a couple of reasons at play for that. They scream value for the price. It's very clear that consumers want that type of cuisine right now. It's portable, it's convenient, it's consistent, and they're winning accordingly. I can't tell you what KFC's issues are. I mean, they are doing what we always talk about with other concepts here, and they're throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks right now. And they just can't seem to get much traction. Where it goes from here is anyone's guess. Along those lines, you mentioned RBI. KFC's biggest, besides Chick-fil-A, of course, biggest domestic competitor, Popeyes, was down negative 3.8%, and that kind of shocked me. They've been positive, throughout this environment up until now, and here they get this big wrench thrown into the quarter. And of course, Burger King, the bigger of the RBI brands, was also down 0.4%. I think Wendy's was up slightly. McDonald's was up 0.3. So if you look at the QSR segment in general, it just, like I said, it wasn't a very sexy quarter, despite really defining the value environment that we're in right now. And I found that to be a little bit, surprising, but no question Taco Bell is construed the winner among all the QSR brands.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple things on all of that. First thing I would say is I wonder with Popeyes and KFC, is it not so much their problem as it is just the category? This is a very, very busy category with players like Chick-fil-A and Raising Cane's that are sucking up a lot of the oxygen. And I just wonder how much that's a big part of it. So for those customers who were once KFC fans and now they're Chick-fil-A fans or Raising Cane's fans, how do you get them back? That could be their problem. Popeyes, of course, rode that tailwind for a long time of their chicken sandwich. And eventually it just became a part of what they did. And the chicken sandwich was, another tool in their toolbox. And that's great. But how do you keep up that momentum? How do you tell customers come here and not there?
Right.
That could be a big part of it. But if there's one thing I think we learned from the election, I think we can also learn from earnings. Inflation just continues to kick customers' butts. I think that's how people voted. That's my assumption, because Trump ran very heavy on economy. And so I think this industry is probably still struggling with, I can't keep spending money on restaurants when I'm spending this much money already as it is on groceries. Now the discounting and the deals, that can be a Band-Aid, but we've seen from history that is never a long-term solution. So maybe the restaurants are running out of gas. Now, the Fed has announced they're going to cut the rate again. So that's probably good news for the industry, at least on the short term, that things will continue to cool down. Of course, with an incoming Republican administration, that's going to ultimately be good for the markets. So perhaps 2025 still some optimism, but it's just interesting after the third quarter. I would have expected more optimism, but it's just not there.
Let me piggyback off that, because I think, I hope we're mostly done with earnings, because this week was really busy.
You need a break.
I need a drink.
Yeah.
But if you pull the big themes, which is my goal for next week, most of these companies, when listening to these calls and gleaning through their transcripts, reported traffic and sales improvements sequentially through Q3 and coming out of the gate hot in Q4. Some of that is probably attributable to, Hurricanes Beryl and Helene, which were both solidly in Q3 and impacted, obviously all the big chains that have a heavy presence in those markets. But if there's a reason for optimism, it is the sequential. We're talking at, everybody from Potbelly to Red Robin to First Watch and Papa John's talked about their sequential improvement and a strong start to Q4. Another thing, if I can, Q3 was the first full quarter of this intensified value environment.
Yep.
McDonald's came out with the $5 meal deal at the end of June. And so, obviously everybody sort of followed suit, and it became the biggest narrative in the industry so far this year. That means that companies were doing the spaghetti against the wall thing, trying to see what worked for their customers to get their customers and new customers not only in, but back. As many company executives noted on their call, there's a lot of noise out there. We heard this from several executives that it was hard to cut through the noise. So thematically speaking, Q3 was very noisy. And I think toward the end of Q3, it seems like a lot of companies really started to adjust and figure out what exactly was working. Dime Brands is a great example here. Yep. John Payton, their CEO, came out and said, look, we figured out and made adjustments and are coming out of the gate in Q4 hot with an adjusted value proposition, where before we were focused on, an quote element of the menu, meaning LTOs. And now we've researched and have seen that our customers want holistic value. They want meal deals, combos. They want, consistent service, all that. So these adjustments are still very much being made in real time. And we're seeing a number of companies, testing and adjusting as this environment, I think, continues longer than many of us probably expected when it started.
And it's so interesting because, you mentioned that noise. I mean, you look at two brands that had previously just been on cloud nine, on a tear, Portillo's and First Watch. Here are two brands that were just like cruising. They weathered the pandemic. They just were killing it. And even they are struggling. They reported sales and traffic being down. So that's a perfect encapsulation of what you're saying. This noise in the marketplace, even those top performers that have had a lot of momentum are struggling. And I think that's definitely true, that there's so much noise in the marketplace. There's so much activity. And by the way, just this massive presidential election that we went through, I'm sure that disrupts the market to a level. And so if we look ahead, we hopefully will start to see a little bit of stabilization in the coming months, certainly for the markets, but also for consumers and their behaviors, because it's tough out there. And I think the restaurants are ready for some positive news and
positive, or at least stability,
stability. Yeah. Now, there are some brands that have been doing very well, and we're going to save those for the end as part of our extra serving. But first, I want to get a little bit sadder. I just want to crank it down a little bit before we get to that happy, which is we also have some bankruptcies. Not some, but a number of bankruptcies. Of course, the biggest was TGI Fridays. This has been expected. Of course, TGI Fridays had closed several restaurants. And so last week they filed for bankruptcy. I mean, I guess we're not surprised, Alicia, but what do we make of TGI Fridays bankruptcy?
Well, TGI Fridays bankruptcy fits a larger pattern that we've seen this year. Like you said, unfortunately, that's just been, if I am to do a year-end piece, that is no question the biggest narrative from this year. And the Wall Street Journal reported, I think a week or two ago, that this was actually the biggest year on record for restaurant bankruptcies. And so again, this is just another example. We had a couple smaller concepts also file this week, so that list continues to grow. And TGI Fridays, I don't think is unique. It struggled through COVID. TGI Fridays is a unique concept. It coined the term happy hour. It was, directly positioned for that sort of urban after work crowd. So I think COVID decimated that concept a little more than others. And of course, like every concept, it struggled to get its groove back, if you will. Now, the past year and a half, especially, has been a little bit of a head scratcher from my vantage point on getting that groove back. They went and they sort of leaned into virtual brands, I think, toward the end of 22, which was not unique. A lot of companies did that to add revenue to their units. What was unique is, when they started bringing some of those items that didn't fit sort of their DNA onto the menu in store. So for example, sushi is the one that comes to my mind. Right. And that was through their partnership with C3, which was their virtual partnership. And I just, when they added sushi and then just started changing the menu and adding and not removing things that, and this was last year when things sort of settled after that late 22, early 23, I guess, renaissance, if you will, when the restaurant industry was buzzing again after COVID. Mm-hmm. It just seemed like it was almost a Hail Mary desperation type thing. They were closing units. They went through 4 CEOs in a matter of months. Yeah. And I wrote about it this week. That's a captainless ship. It's going to go all over the place, and it seems like that's exactly what happened. And then obviously this year was just, the writing was on the wall this year with the closures. There were 2 significant closures, one in January with about 36 units, and then one last month with about 49 units. They're a shell of what they used to be just 10 years ago. And I think they've closed 70% of those units since 2014. And, then sold it to the UK franchisee. That deal fell through. And then here we are at bankruptcy. Yep. So it was just this weird story that had a lot of twists and turns and ended with, that Saturday morning Chapter 11 filing.
Yeah, love that time.
Love it.
Love that time. Trying to sneak one under on us, but we're always watching. I suspect, Alicia, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, whenever we start to write the books on this era, of course there have been on some already, but like when we look back with hindsight, I think it'll be a lot easier for us to connect those dots. As you're talking about sort of that wandering journey that a company like TGI Fridays has had. When you look at a lot of these bankruptcies, Red Lobster, I mean, when we take a step back years from now and review this period, it will be very obvious to see some of these signposts along the way where COVID and the various strategies that restaurants use to get through COVID, and then the debt that they piled up, and then not being able to pay off the creditors, and then here we are at bankruptcy, and all of that. I think it's not a surprise. You've used that term best, that the chickens have come home to roost, right? For so many of these companies. And this is just another one. But again, we'll see it a lot better when we can take that step back years into the future with hindsight, see how this has all worked. But because I think about it too, I think about how in 2020, we all thought, well, 2021, we're going to see some relief once we're through COVID. Okay, that didn't happen. 2022, we're going to see some relief. That didn't happen. We start to talk about, well, we're going to have the roaring 20s at some point here, and that 2023 is bad. Okay, 2024 is our year. Not our year. And so we keep saying, well, in 2025, maybe that'll be it. And maybe it will be. I don't know. But again, we're never going to know this until we look back with some hindsight. And it's just been a journey, to say the least. It's
been a journey, but because I'm a annoyingly Pollyannish person. And, of course, when you take out so much debt to get through COVID, to get through labor shortages, to get through supply chain issues, when you take out so much debt, and that debt becomes expensive by the very nature of what's happening in the macro, and then consumers start pulling back, it's going to be a really, really sloppy situation. That's where we are. On the conversely, where my Pollyannishness kind of kicks in, I do strongly believe in you. And I've been covering this industry for almost 15 years now, Sam. I don't think operators are becoming smarter by necessity. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing more conversations about sort of, maybe pumping the brakes on growth for growth's sake and focusing instead on four-wall growth. I'm hearing more conversations in earnest about unit economics and getting those, up to snuff. focus more on less debt, all that stuff. And I think if there's a silver lining to all of this, efficiencies, all of that is, I think once we get through whatever the hell we're getting through right now, I do think that we'll be better positioned. We might be a smaller industry, but I think we're going to be a smarter, more efficient industry with better unit economics. And amen for that.
I tend to agree with you. I'm hoping that you are true about that. Let's get happier. Let's get a little bit more. Let's have some more optimism.
You can't not when you bring Ron on the call.
I know. It's time for the extra serving of the episode. Very excited. Welcome, senior editor Ron Ruggles to Extra Serving. Ron, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Ron, I don't think you're bringing the joy, because Alicia and I have sort of wrestled through 25 minutes of pain. But this is time to now let's look at some positive news. 3 brands you have reported on have some good things to report, and I wanted to talk to you about those. Let's start with Red Robin, because Red Robin on the surface maybe not as positive. You might not think that it's as positive, but I do think Red Robin in their third quarter earnings had some reason to be optimistic. Ron, let's start there. What did Red Robin have to report?
Red Robin actually was very optimistic about their loyalty program. This is something that's happening in the industry right now, how they're looking at customers. And this I actually crossed all 3 brands that we're probably going to discuss, which also include Dutch Bros and Sweetgreen. But I think there is a real look at the consumer and how they're attaching themselves to restaurants and restaurant brands. And I think it's a positive indication how they're using their employees more wisely and attaching to their consumers in a better way.
Yeah, loyalty programs, of course, have been all the rage for 4 or 5 years now, especially I think to see a full service brand like a Red Robin leaning into that. I personally believe that loyalty, and maybe it's just because so many of the companies kind of figured out their loyalty within the last couple of years, but as we've gotten into these discounting wars, I've been a little surprised we haven't seen more by way of attaching that to loyalty. Maybe I'm wrong. Alicia, what did you think about Red Robin's loyalty news?
I think it's early days. Yeah. I think that's why I haven't seen it. I mean, Red Robin, it's fledgling. Sweetgreen is just now getting into the game. There are a couple, Papa John's is refreshing. I think to Ron's point, brands are starting to realize that they need this, this interface with consumers. First Watch talked at length about one-on-one marketing. I mean, this is a very early days conversation. I think the bigger guys have it figured out, but we're now talking about, the Red Robins and the First Watches of the world, kind of following their lead. And we know for a fact that loyalty programs lead to higher check and more frequency. So I'm glad the conversation's happening.
It also allows them to market cheaper and more personal to their consumer, which I think in this post-COVID world is going to be more and more important.
Totally. So Ron, you mentioned those other 2 that I wanted to talk about. Let's start with Sweetgreen. Sweetgreen reported sales, same-store sales were up, I believe, 6%. Sweetgreen continues to roll. I had a conversation on Takeaway a few weeks ago with Nicholas Jamet, their co-founder. And what I threw at him was how I feel like, and you guys probably feel the same way from our position in the media. We used to hear so much about how much Sweetgreen was a technology company, but they've really pulled back on that. I think they've changed the narrative very well into talking a lot more about their food innovation. That's continued as they're continuing to step on the accelerator when it comes to menu R&D. Ron, how do you think food is fueling this new surge of momentum for Sweetgreen?
We are in the restaurant business, and it is a food business.
Yep.
Basically. Their Sweetgreen, of course, was a very urban concept. It really relied on office workers for lunch. They're really having to turn around and expand their menu. They talked about testing fries in Southern California, an air-fried fry. No seed oils used. They've had great success with their garlic steak proteins, which expands their day parts, which I think Sweetgreen is probably very wise in it's looking at beverages and desserts as well.
The fries kind of caught me by surprise.
Yeah.
Now, hey, if anybody's going to do fries in a responsible, more healthy way, I think it's going to be Sweetgreen. But do we think that's what the core demographic wants? Do we think they want fries?
I think everybody likes fries.
Yep, guilty.
I think it's one of the things. It definitely is a big veto factor.
Yeah.
If you don't have something, and the way they're doing it, air fried with non-seed oil on it, it's called ripple fries, I think, is what they're testing. They said they won't have it even possibly introduced until next year, but they are testing it in Southern California now. And Dutch Brothers, which has never really had food, it's always been beverages, is starting to think about food and using its drive-throughs for food delivery, which I think is a very smart move.
You took the segue right out of my mouth, Ron. Good job. You know what? You should, Alicia and I will step out. You got this. So yes, Dutch Bros here is, and I find this really interesting because we've talked about on this podcast before how the drive-through coffee concepts, one of the things that allows them to grow so quickly, so efficiently, to have such small footprints is the fact that they don't have food. With some exceptions, of course, Scooters has some food, some others do. But Dutch Bros was one that has not, by and large, had food. Now they're saying they're going to test food. And to take a step back, Dutch Bros, their sales growth was modest, I believe 2%. Revenue growth, however, was something like 28% because of how many locations they've opened, 30 some locations. And so they're still growing very quickly. Do we think food is feasible? What are their plans for food, Ron?
They didn't say, in fact, I don't even think they know at this point. They're still testing it. But I think with Christine Barone, formerly of True Food Kitchen, at the helm, they have some bona fides for food. So I think you'll see it simple. I think it's going to be simple like it is at Cosmix. Just a couple of items, but it allows for a lot of attachment with a beverage and a bagel, or a beverage and a biscuit, and simplicity. Breakfast is breakfast items are generally very simple. So I think you're going to see Dutch Bros do something very simple and very straightforward and very limited.
I have to imagine, I mean, there's no way they can add equipment here, right? I mean, if you add equipment to these shops, that's a massive capital investment. Of course, there's a whole space consideration. They're very small footprints. So I would have to imagine this is going to be some sort of commissary situation, prepackaged foods. Alicia, do you have any guesses as to what Dutch Bros might do?
I tried to get this out of, because I interviewed Sumi Ghosh, their president of operations, at the Create event in Nashville, and I tried to get those answers out of him, and he just wasn't budging. I'm going to have to do a better job getting that out of him. But I agree with you. This is really intriguing. It's a good way for them to differentiate a little bit from perhaps Seven Brew, which I talk about all the time because there's so many around me in Louisville now. But the operational simplicity, to Ron's point, it's critical here. So with the equipment implications, who knows? But it has to come down to what is operationally simple, because these drive-through only concepts are, they're growing and they're built explicitly on throughput. And I go to Seven Brew every Friday morning after swim practice, and if I get slowed down, I get angry. And so, that's the point of this concept, is in and out, in and out, in and out. So I'm sure that's what this test is about, this bakery and savory hot food test. But, I guess we'll see next year. I really don't know what to expect here.
Well, I don't think you're going to see anybody turn the industry on its head. I think you're just going to see a little bit of a fork and knife going in there and just opening up a little space. And it can be very profitable.
No doubt. The attachment thing is really attractive here.
Well, and doesn't it totally go back to, Alicia, what you were saying before about growth in the four walls, right? You know, Dutch Bros clearly growing their store count, but now this is growth within the four walls that you have to invest in, getting revenue out of every footprint that you have now. So exciting to see. All right, lightning round before we say goodbye. After all of our reporting for the third quarter earnings, one brand that you're most optimistic about coming out of the third quarter. Ron, let's start with you.
I just listened to the call this morning, but Sweetgreen's really does intrigue me, what they're doing. I'm not a big salad guy. I do go to Salad and Go maybe twice a month, but I think Sweetgreen may be getting it right.
That's a good answer. I will say my piece about Sweetgreen, and I've again had a conversation with Nick Jammett on Takeaway, so go listen to that, and I get into it there. But if I were to use Columbus as an example for Sweetgreen, they opened their first location close to downtown in a very popular district called Short North. 20-minute drive for me. I'm not going. I went down to report on the opening. When I am down there, I'm going to get it, and I like Sweetgreen a good deal, but they got to get to the suburbs to get me to go there, because I'm very rooted here because of children, life, etc. And I think that suburban push, I'm with you, Ron. I think that Sweetgreen, their menu is so good. I think it's such an exciting brand, but you got to get the brand to the people versus the other way around.
There are only 253 units, I think, at the end of the third quarter. I think as you see them get bigger, say around the Dutch Bros 900 unit size, I think if they're on your side of the road as you're going somewhere, I think it'll be a lot more convenient.
Totally. Yep. That's where it will be in our regular consideration set. Alicia, what is your brand that you're most optimistic about?
I can't pick just one. That's like asking to pick one child.
Hey, lucky for you, you have one child.
Yeah, that's right. No, I will say I like the progress that is being made at places like Potbelly, Red Robin, Denny's. I like the progress. I like the plans that they're putting into place, closing underperforming stores, for example. I like the ground floor prospect of, Shake Shack and Sweetgreen, both, adding a loyalty program next year. That's their priority next year. And I think that's a huge deal. I am bullish on Taco Bell still. They're just doing everything right. And they have this really fledgling international piece that is going to have huge implications, for this growth engine that they already have. Probably the same could be said about Chipotle, which we talked about last week, Sam, with their big international ambitions there. So that's where what would I say, 8, 9?
Oh yeah.
I'm Pollyannish about everything. All the brands.
It felt like Taco Bell listened to Extra Serving last week, because we mentioned Taco Bell in their international strategy and how it was relating to Chipotle in their own. And here we are, Taco Bell, talking about the potential in international. I was going to say Taco Bell too for that reason, but now I'm going to switch to Dutch Bros just because I want to pick something different. I just think that Dutch Bros and their ilk, but Dutch Bros especially because of how I think that company is still, I just think that company's still kind of solidifying around its corporate team. Christine Barone, you mentioned, Ron. Sumi Ghosh, who spoke at Create, was amazing, and he came from Nike, I want to say. Is that right, Alicia?
He did, yep. And prior to that, Starbucks.
That's right. So the team that they're building there, and I have it on good authority that I know that they're building a new headquarters. It just seems like they're just getting started and they're about to cross 1,000 locations. So for me, I think that's the direction I would go in. But, with the coffee competition, it's hard to say because it could get saturated fast.
They've got the units, though.
But they've got the units. They won, so to speak, the coffee drive-through, but anything goes. We'll see what happens in the coming months. Ron Ruggless, Alicia Kelso, thanks as always for joining Extra Serving.
Thank you very much,
Sam.